Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me today on the line, we have a special guest. He will be taking on Josh Berkman at UFC 214 from Anaheim, California. He is Mr. Drew Dober. And Drew, thanks for coming back on Beyond the Cage.
Thank you for having me.
Now, of course, Drew, we just had Memorial Day here in the States. So, how was your Memorial Day?
It was good. I'm currently here in Las Vegas doing some tests at the UFC Performance Institute.
Now, one of the things, speaking of the UFC, they had the Fighter Summit a few weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, if my math is correct here. Did you attend the summit? And if so, what did you get out of that summit or athlete retreat, as they were calling it?
Oh, yes, I was there. And, I took a lot from it. I think, their goals were to, bring the fighters together and kind of use the fighters to kind of create a buzz and kind of use social media to kind of show off, these, random things. But, I think it was good. I think it was good. They educated us in specific aspects of the sport. They had like special guest speakers. We get to meet the new owners. Plus, I think most of all I took from it was just being able to, like, being surrounded by your peers, your coworkers, or your potential opponents was extremely motivating and pretty awesome. So,
Of the speakers that were there, is there anyone in particular that stood out to you?
um, not anyone in particular actually stood out to me. No.
Now, of course, the big thing that happened at the summit, I don't know if you saw this or maybe heard about it afterwards, but I guess there was a huge thing between Angela Magana and Chris Cyborg, where apparently Cyborg threw a punch at Magana, reportedly knocking out her tooth, is what I've heard from conflicting reports. Did you see or hear anything about this whole scuffle between those two ladies?
I heard that it happened, and then I saw the video when I was on like a UFC bus, but I wasn't in front of it, and I didn't really talk to either of them afterwards either.
Now, is that a situation? I don't know how that happened, but as far as Magana being a 115 fighter, taking on Cyborg, a 145 fighter, regardless of what was said between those two women, wouldn't you think that's probably a bad idea on the part of Magana?
Maybe, but when it comes to a street fight, I mean, they could have friends, weapons or whatever. I mean, you never know. So, I think honestly, I think Chris Cyborg was the one that approached Magana.
All right, let's get to you here, Drew Dober. And your last fight, of course, didn't go your way against Olivier Aubin Mercier. What were you able to take from that fight there at UFC 206 to help you here in this camp moving to UFC 214?
Probably the biggest thing is I've been really working on like mental training. I guess the theory is MMA or athletics is 80% mental, 20% physical, and I think I've been really lacking in, you know, training kind of in the mental game, coming in with unrelenting confidence and positive attitude that can be maintained in the middle of the fight.
Now, looking at your opponent here in Josh Berkman coming up for UFC 214, many, including me, thought he was close to retiring after his last fight and lost there to Michel Prazeres, and it looks as though this may be his last fight potentially. Once you kind of start thinking about retirement, do you feel as though that kind of you already got one foot out the door, that maybe all your focus isn't necessarily at the task at hand for a guy like Josh Berkman?
That could be it. Or it could be that, if he knows that this is his last fight, he he's going to give it his all. He's going to, make sure it is kind of like the cherry on the cake, the best fight he's ever had. So I think, if that's the case, he might come in as the best Josh Berkman to date. So I'm thoroughly prepared for this.
Now, recently he's kind of fell on hard times as he's only won one fight in his last seven since returning to the UFC in January of 2015. Some of those he's had some bad performances. Other ones he just kind of was on the wrong side of the judges' scorecard. So is it kind of hard to look at a guy and really break him down like what he can do good when he has been on such a bad streak as of late?
I mean, Josh Brickman, I mean, he fights anyone and everyone. You know, he's had some super tough fights. He takes like short notice fights. I mean, he just absolutely loves fighting, and he doesn't really care who it is. So I mean, you got to look at the quality of the fight and not just the end result. Even his last one, even though it didn't go his way, and he got caught with a tough punch, but he was able to like survive for at least half the round, on his back foot. And so, I mean, the guy's super tough, extremely game, and I know, it's going to take a lot to put him away.
Now, since dropping down to 155 for his last few fights, he has definitely seemed like a guy that's kind of been drawn out and maybe not as best conditioning as we've seen him compete at 170. Do you feel as though that kind of gives you an advantage heading into this fight since it is at 155 pounds?
I think Josh Berkman and I are pretty much are the same size, or maybe I'm bigger. So I think weight cut, it kind of affects us both the same.
Now, of course, you're fighting at UFC 214, which as of right now, and I clearly state that as of right now, it will be John Jones against Daniel Cormier. As we all know, this fight has been canceled, I think, 5 or 6 times here for the rematch. So, as of right now, here at the end of May, Drew, how do you think that main event there is going to play out between Cormier and Jones?
Oh man, I'm super excited to watch this fight. I'm gonna get my fight done and over with, so I can get in my seats to actually watch this one. It's like my heart goes out with Cormier, but my logic, if I was a betting man, I'd put money on Jones.
Also on the card, a matchup I think a lot of people are excited for, mainly just because he's now back in the UFC and people love watching this guy fight, and that's the Korean zombie Chang Sung-jung. He's having one of his toughest fights here, taking on another top 5 guy in Ricardo Lamas at 145. What do you think about that fight, Drew?
I think it's gonna be a barn burner. Like I think both those guys are super phenomenal. Like, and each one of them are just gonna try to play chins with each other. So that's gonna be fun to watch. But I personally think Korean Zombie's gonna take it.
Now, Drew, last time we had you on, we talked about comic book movies and stuff like that. So, of course, Guardians of the Galaxy came out about a month ago. Did you see the movie, and what did you think about the sequel?
Yeah, I've seen it twice in theaters. Actually, I watched it again since I've been here in Vegas, and I think it's absolutely amazing. I think my favorite character is the baby Groot.
Now, did you like this one better than the first Guardians?
I think they kind of kept on the same kind of like humor, action, and all that stuff. So I think the first one like really like introduced the characters, and so this one actually allowed to actually like, use the characters' personalities for more humor. So I think I may like this one better.
Now, of course, this weekend is big for DC Comics as the first ever live-action Wonder Woman movie will be coming to screens. Are you excited for Wonder Woman this weekend?
I'm completely a Marvel person, so I mean, I'll probably end up seeing it, but I'm not as excited. No.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I want to give a fun fact for people out there from Wonder Woman. And I don't know if you knew this, Drew, as well, but one of the co-creators of Wonder Woman, William Moulton Marston, he is also the same guy that invented the polygraph machine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that is a nice fun fact I wanted to share with you and the listeners here of Beyond the Cage, that this man was multifaceted.
That's awesome. I appreciate this.
Now, of course, speaking of Marvel, the next Marvel movie, it is away, and we might probably interview before then, but just the early glimpses you've seen of Thor Ragnarok, what do you think about that movie coming up?
It seems very intense, like a lot going on. I'm definitely excited to see it, but I don't want to get my expectations too high.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way because they introduce Hela, who is the goddess of hell in Norse mythology, as the villain, which she looks spectacular just from the screens we've seen. And then, of course, they added in an element that's actually from Planet Hulk because they're not making a Hulk movie where Hulk ends up on this kind of like gladiator type planet where he's battling people. And in the comics, I think it's Beta Ray Bill he faces, which is actually a close ally of Thor. but they just changed it around because they're movies, and it's cool to see different things. So it ends up being Thor sent to this gladiator planet. So I think that's a really cool twist that they're adding. And then, of course, calling it Ragnarok, which in Norse mythology is the end of the world. So, like you
Yeah.
said, there's definitely a lot of cool things going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, he is Drew Dober. You can follow him on Twitter at Drew Dober. And as I said, he will be taking on Josh Berkman at UFC 214. That's coming up July 29th at the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. And Drew, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I look forward to your fight against Josh Berkman coming up in July.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Once again, that was Drew Dober right here on Beyond the Cage. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I'm your host, Jim Graham, and joining me today on the line, we have a special guest. He will be making his UFC debut at UFC 214 against Eric Shelton. He is the Monkey God, Jared Brooks. And Jared, thanks for coming on Beyond the Cage.
Hey, it's great, man. Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Now, as fans may or may not know, you were actually supposed to make your UFC debut earlier this year at UFC 208, but once again, Ian McCall was unable to complete a bout, whether it was of his own volition or his opponent's, the week of the fight. That fight had to be canceled. Obviously, that had to be kind of frustrating. Not only did you get that fight on short notice, but then have it canceled, just days before the event.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always around weight, so I can fight at 125 anytime. Like, I'm always fight ready, so I can fight within, 1 to 2 weeks or, even 2 days, just depending on how I feel, you know what I'm saying? But I think that Ian's a good dude, you know what I'm saying? He's not a bad guy. I just put on the ruckus, you know what I'm saying? I just want to bring that to the people to where they get excited for a fight. If I have to be a villain for a fight, and if that gets me a fight, then I'm gonna do it. But yeah, I was a little torn when Ian backed out. Ian, I saw him at when he was cutting weight, he was good. I saw him at the weigh-ins, he was good. He's trying to be friendly and talk to me after, but I wasn't really having that. But
now, obviously, with the fight happening, closing or canceling, I should say, that close. Were you hoping to get a fight, sooner than obviously, you're going to be fighting in July? Did you think you were going to be fighting, sooner than July, or is it that's just how things worked out for you?
Well, let me give you some intel a little bit. I was actually rescheduled to fight Ian McCall at UFC, the one in Dallas, May 11th or May 13th. And that's when he announced that he wasn't going to fight at flyweight anymore.
Yeah, that's obviously something I don't think too many news outlets reported on. Obviously, with him not going to be fighting at flyweight,
Well, there was no bout agreement or anything like that. There was no bout agreement or anything like that, but it was a verbal,
Now, obviously, with him moving to bantamweight, does that pretty much nix any chance of ever fighting him?
Dude, I'll fight that dude tomorrow at any weight. Like his passion is into other things besides fighting now. So I think that you have to have a certain amount of passion to get where you want to be. He had passion, in 2012 when he was competing against 3 other flyweights, which there was no other flyweights in the division. So, I mean, he's only been beat by Demetrius Johnson and Joseph Benavidez, so I got to give him props with that. But a 2.5-year layoff and going against me, he probably didn't really want that.
Now, of course, looking at your fight coming up here at UFC 214, you'll be taking on Eric Shelton. He's a guy that most fans did not know until he appeared on The Ultimate Fighter Season 24, where he ended up upsetting really 2 fighters in Yanni Sherbatov and then Ronald Candino before eventually losing to Tim Elliott in the semifinals, and then had a very close split decision loss to Alexandre Pantoja, who was also featured on that season of The Ultimate Fighter. Is he a guy to you that the skills or the show really brought out how talented this guy is just because he was fighting in smaller promotions that just no one ever really got to see what he could bring to the table?
Well, I mean, the quality of guys that you fight, you kind of compete at that level. That's why it kind of sucked throughout, mine and Eric's career, fighting people that were not in the UFC that weren't like, ready for us, you know what I'm saying? Like when people are like technical and we're used to that technicality in practice and then you see it out in the cage, it's actually a lot easier. I'd rather fight somebody like Demetrius than some retard bum.
Absolutely. And you guys are similar in terms of, obviously he does have a few losses to his record, but you're both young guys. You're both listed at 5'3", both looking to make a name for yourself in the flyweight division. Obviously, he has a little bit of a head start having been on the Ultimate Fighter in one fight in the UFC, but do you feel this is a really good test for you for your Octagon debut?
I was supposed to be well, I wasn't supposed to be on that season, but I was an alternate on that show. They must have just seen something like I think there was like rankings and I didn't have like a legitimate like championship that was a feeder in the UFC, you know what I'm saying? They wanted to have me on, but it was against like the criteria. But I saw all those guys on the Ultimate Fighter, chilled with them a little bit, got blood tests and stuff, and I didn't see too many people that like I can look into another fighter's eyes and see if they're about it, see if they're like extremely passionate. And I didn't see too many people in there. Tim Elliott's a really, really cool dude. I like Tim Elliott, and he's Eric Shelton's practice partner. But sorry, Tim, I'm gonna have to break the bones off you, boy.
Now, looking at his skill set, he really came into the show primarily as a striker. I would still say in the wrestling department, something he's still developing in. Do you feel that's the biggest hole in his game is his wrestling?
I can't really say too much because he's I watched a lot of video. He's decently well rounded. He goes for takedowns and stuff like that. But I hope he doesn't try to. I mean, actually, I hope he tries to take me down because that's gonna be where it ends. But he developed as a striker. Getting with Miletich and Peace Brat. I followed his career since like 2011. I follow the whole flyweight division, so I'm watching all the guys that have fought and the people that I think that can be up and coming too. So I want to study this division, get it down to where I can, fight top 5 caliber, and then we'll see where that goes.
Now, even though he has a pretty good striking game, only 2 knockouts to his credit, what do you think about his skills compared to yours on the feet?
Well, I'm still developing as a striker. I started out as a wrestler and doing jiu-jitsu, but I think that my striking is up there. I mean, I was striking with Justin Scoggins for about a year and a half, and then I work with boxing coaches like Kara Rowe. She's like one of the best boxing coaches in the world. And then you got this guy named Meiti Tai. He's the world champion in Muay Thai that I work with. And it's about working with the best of the best, and your workout partners are. I mean, Justin Scoggins is way better than Eric Shelton. Like there's levels to this game, and I know that there's levels to this game. But I've been working with like some of the best. Like I spar with world champions in boxing, and I think that Scoggins is going to knock out. Sasaki, the guy that Wilson Hayes just fought.
Yes.
Sasaki, I think that he's going to get knocked out in the first round. I mean, Justin fought that Pedro Munoz. He was eating that dude alive on the feet, like straight eating that dude alive, and then he tripped up, and then Pedro Munoz's guillotines are well known, so. But he's back at 125. He's going to be, ready for this fight. I'm down here right now getting him ready. So, and he's getting me ready for Eric. I mean, he's the most unorthodox striker in the UFC, and that's pinpoint. It's not like Tim Elliott unorthodox, but he's unorthodox to where if he hits you somewhere, you're not gonna want to like move. He gets you trapped, cornered. I think that's what he's gonna do to this dude. But yeah, Eric Shelton, I don't see him getting out of the first round with me. We've had common opponents. I've watched him fight his whole life, and he's not going to be ready for the fire that I bring and the noise that I'm going to make in the division, because everybody needs somebody in the division, because Demetrius, he has this together, but he doesn't have the PR work that I can bring to the table. And Justin and I, we're gonna take over this division for real.
Now, speaking of Demetrius Johnson, he is actually under some heat for basically nixing a potential bout with TJ Dillashaw after it was found out that Cody Garbrandt would not be able to face TJ coming up the first weekend of July during Ultimate Fighter Week. That opened up the possibility of TJ dropping down to fight Demetrius, and Demetrius pretty much kind of dispatched the former bantamweight champion. Did that kind of surprise you at all to see Demetrius kind of take a fight that a lot of people would like to see in a fight that, and whether that's fair or not, validate him breaking the title defense record against one of the best fighters regardless of weight class there in TJ Dillashaw?
Demetrius will beat TJ Dillashaw for the simple fact that TJ does not know how 125 flyweights work that are good, you know what I'm saying, that are in the top five. I mean, he went against John Dotson and got knocked out in the first round. I know that it was like, 4 or 5 years ago, but at the same time, like littler guys are way harder to fight than taller guys. And I think that Demetrius has a lot more tools. I mean, yeah, he can have, Dwayne Ludwig's Muay Thai and stuff like that, but Demetrius is constantly moving, and they work with people that are like just straight Muay Thai that stand in front of each other,
Do you think, obviously with his skill set, and you seem pretty confident that he would beat TJ Dillashaw, does it surprise you that Demetrius would decide not to fight him at all and choose to fight Ray Borg, who a lot of people would consider an easier fight for DJ compared to TJ?
DJ is going to do what is smart, and he's going to fight Ray Borg for the simple fact that he's going to make an extra, 500,000, give or take. But at the same time, he's not like making noise fighting all these, dudes that the flyweight division people don't really get about. So I'm here to make noise. I mean, in my opinion, those guys right now, I'm thinking about, me and my bout. I'm gonna be, fighting up there with them in the next 2 years. So if people want to get it, they can come get it.
Now, in a potential bout between Johnson and Ray Borg, does Ray Borg stand any semblance of a chance against Mighty Mouse?
My boy Scoggins, did you see him in Ray Borg?
Yes, I remember that fight.
Yeah, he ate Ray Borg up on the feet. He had nothing that he could do to Justin besides hit him with one overhand right. And Justin was just picking him apart the whole time, and Ray didn't have an answer. But Ray, he just beat Jussier Formiga, clap, clap. The guy's 32 years old. He's probably not passionate about the sport either. But I think that Ray is young, and he could get a chance. He could do it, but at the same time, just know that, Justin and I are coming for that belt. If we have to fight each other at the end of the day, that's cool. But
now, like you said, Justin rededicating himself to the flyweight division, a guy that definitely has had some trouble in the past making that 125 mark. Do you feel, as a guy that knows him well, do you feel it was just a mental thing, or do you think it was a physical thing, or what do you think it was kind of preventing him from making that limit consistently like he had been doing in years past?
Justin was just young, you know what I'm saying? Like, he thinks that he's invincible sometimes, and, it showed a couple times when he couldn't make the weight. But he tried his ass off. It wasn't a mental thing. Justin is not really somebody that folds mentally. But he ended up not being his kidneys about shut down in this last fight. Who was that against? No, that was the one that he missed weight on. Ian McCall. Yeah, and I just think that he is the most misunderstood fighter in the UFC. Like, he is the white Bruce Lee for real. Like, I've never met anybody in my life that could strike like him. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Stephen Thompson is up there, but he brings like Floyd Mayweather boxing, from I think that he's actually more like Muhammad Ali, like he fights like Muhammad Ali, like in boxing. And his kicks are definitely Stephen Thompson's esque, But I'm here to pretty much just get my striking in with him, and he's gonna get some wrestling from me. So.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you were planning on dispatching Eric Shelton in the first round. Is there any particular method you see that going down, Jared?
No, I'm gonna go out there and flow and have fun and go where the fight takes me. And usually that ends with me getting finished. So I think that he is high caliber. Don't get me wrong, he's in the UFC, but he's not going to be ready for the kind of pressure that I bring. He trains with pretty decent guys, but when those guys, go get, let's just say if I went and trained with Eric right now, I would eat Eric, I would eat all those alpha male guys that left. I mean, Tim Elliott just seen an opportunity, but.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you was the UFC Athlete Summit that happened, I think it was a week or two ago. Obviously, I believe you were in attendance for that.
Yeah.
There was a big scuffle apparently between Angela Magana and Chris Cyborg. I was wondering if you had seen that go down or if you heard about it, and what you maybe know from an insider perspective of what went down between those two women.
Actually, man, I did not go. I stayed home and watched my dogs while James, my coach, went to Aruba. So I unfortunately couldn't go, but I would have loved to seen that. I heard that Snoop Dogg was there. That's pretty cool. So I think that the UFC, a lot of people like I don't know who it was. Kazangano said something about like, they're spending money on all this, but I mean, be thankful, period, that the UFC is in existence and that they're doing all these things for you and giving you these clothes and, giving you all the opportunity in the world to do what you want in life,
Now, I know you've done some training recently, and after you're done helping out, Justin, you will return to Michigan to do some training here inside the state. And rumor has it that the UFC is planning on returning to the great state of Michigan later this year. And it looks like the brand new Joe Louis Arena replacement, I should say, in Little Caesars Arena is. Have you heard anything like that? And if so, is that a card that you would most certainly like to be on?
Yes, I have heard that. I heard December. That's unofficial, so I have no idea. But I've heard rumors that it's in December, and I would love to get on that card because I have a lot of fans around the area that would like to see me fight and want to see me grow to be a champion. So a lot of people just around fight time, I just get in that fight mode, and just like I've been since I was 13 years old, I haven't been out of that fight mode when I got in it. But I'm gonna go out there and knock Eric Shelton out in the first round. If it's a choke, it's a fist, or elbow. He's going out, and I'm gonna go on and fight somebody in the top 15 and top 10, top 5, and then give me whoever, Demetrius Johnson, TJ Dillashaw. But TJ probably ain't gonna want to fight at 125 again.
He is the Monkey God, Jared Brooks, and you can follow him on Twitter at @the_Monkey God. And Jared, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I look forward to your debut later this year.
All right, brother. I appreciate it. You guys have a good day.
Once again, that was Jared Brooks right here on Beyond the Cage. Jim Graham live here on MMA Warriors on Facebook, going to recap UFC Fight Night 109, better known as UFC Stockholm, this past Sunday from the Ericsson Globe in Stockholm, Sweden. Little over 12,000 in attendance to see this fight.
shown live here on FS1 this past Sunday for Memorial Day weekend. Going to break down the main card. 6 fights were shown on FS1. Before I get to that, want to talk about the undercard real quickly. Really fantastic, really overall fight, but knee by Damir Hadzovic, if I said that correctly, is he was able to knock out Marcin Held with a absolutely crazy knee out of nowhere there in the 3rd round to get the victory over a very tough fighter and Marcin Held. And Held, a guy that came into the UFC with a lot of hype, obviously a guy that competed for the Bellator lightweight championship and was definitely one of their top guys. Has definitely fallen flat here so far in the UFC, has now found himself 0-3. Got beat by Diego Sanchez in his debut in November 2016. Then probably had a win against Joe Lazone back at Fight Night, I believe that was 105 in January of this year, as he lost a very close split decision to Joe Lazone. Now gets knocked out here against Hadzovic. Probably is going to find himself getting released. And one thing I always said about Marcin Held, especially towards the end of his Bellator career, was for being a young guy that doesn't cut a lot of weight, is not a big lightweight. This is a guy that may try to cut the 10 pounds and get to 145. And I think now with these 3 fights here in the UFC, I think that's a big difference. And that is something I think this young man from Poland has to look at, because this is a fight where he definitely was winning. I mean, he had 4 takedowns in this fight. He was outstriking his opponent. He outstruck him 62-19, but because he's not a big guy, he's not imposing. If he's not getting the submission, he's probably not going to knock you out. He's not really known as that guy. It could take a crazy strike from a guy like Hadzovic's, the Bosnian bomber, to come out of nowhere and finish you. A fight that you were winning, and the next thing you know, all people remember is that crazy knee. And now you find yourself 0-3 and most likely cut from the UFC. So I think this is something that he's going to have to consider if he wants to compete at the highest level, and if he wants to get back in the UFC. I just don't think he can do it at 155 pounds. I think he's going to have to try to cut to 145, and I think that may end up being what could spur him to having a more successful career. I mean, he's been successful, but again, there's just some big dudes in this weight class, and Held's one of the smaller guys, and it's going to be hard to compete with some of these big dudes in this division, and I think moving down to 145 would be the answer for him. Maybe not the answer to solve all his problems, but I think that would be a very big factor in him moving forward and having a successful mixed martial arts career. Some of the other fights on the undercard, a very big win for Bohan Veljevic, if I said that correctly. He took on Nico Musoke. This fight was actually kind of rather pedestrian. I didn't really think it was that great a fight. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, kind of much like the Bosnian bomber there. Not quite, losing the fight, but definitely a fight that, was kind of going one way or maybe not that great. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you see a huge finish. That being there with Veljevic, as he was able to get the knockout victory in there in the 3rd round. And like I said, kind of a pedestrian fight. Then all of a sudden that came out of nowhere, and that's why you love this sport. A fight that maybe seemed boring, maybe you start to tune out a little bit, and all of a sudden something crazy like that happens. The 2 out of the first 3 fights. So it really shows you why I love this sport and why many do is for stuff like that. Joaquim Silva against Reza Madadi. I don't know how this didn't win fight of the night, if I'm being honest. I thought this was the fight of the night. It was the best back and forth. I think it was the best competitive matchup of any fight on this card. And to not see it get a performance of the night bonus is, I think, kind of a slight to both these gentlemen, in my opinion. And if you didn't see this fight, try to find it. It was on the FS1 portion of the prelims. I thought this was a fantastic back-and-forth fight. I thought Madadi really controlled the first round, was able to land a couple takedowns there, really control the fight against a very accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner in Joaquim Silva. The second fight, or the second round, I should say, it's kind of even. Madadi seemed to be getting the better of the striking of the two in the first round as well. that continued. Then all of a sudden in the second round, you saw Silva start to kind of turn the tide a little bit. And, Madadi did land some nice shots, but Silva, it seemed like he really hurt Madadi. I think was actually maybe the closest to finishing either guy finishing the fight. Madadi did land a takedown, but only one, and it didn't last very long in that second round. And then around 3, I thought Silva really started to take over. He definitely looked like the fresher individual. Got taken down a couple times, was able to reverse the position. He had some time on top, outstruck Madadi 31-10, bloodied up Madadi. I thought really secured that third round. And, it was going to be how you really scored that second round, because I think most people would agree Madadi in the first, Silva in the third. It's really how you scored that second round. And I thought the judges may give Madadi the second round. I think even though Silva started to take over, obviously the crowd was behind Madadi, and I think that sometimes maybe inadvertently can sway the judges, when you hear the crowd oohing and awing over when their guy lands the big shot and don't, say anything, or, no cheering when the other guy lands a big shot. So I thought maybe subjectively the crowd may influence the judges. However, they give Joaquim Silva the split decision, much to the chagrin of the crowd there in Stockholm. And this was a very close fight, and I think the judges could have won either way. But I think picking Silva, I can agree with that. And it just was a very tremendous fight, and I thought it was both guys should have been rewarded with a performance of the night bonus. But I digress. Trevor Smith dominated Chris Camozzi, complete wipeout in that one. Pedro Munoz against Damian Stasic. Stasic, I think, was a slow starter in this matchup. Munoz, I thought, definitely took over the first round. Second round, start to see a little more from Stasic. I thought you could probably give him the second round, but then I thought Munoz just took it back over in the third to get the unanimous decision victory. Now getting it to the main card, Jack Hermanson against Alex Nicholson. And I will admit, on this very Facebook page, MMA Warriors, Jim Graham, you can follow me on Twitter @Jim Graham, picked Alex Nicholson, and I thought I did so rather convincingly. And boy, was I ever wrong. I mean, this was a bad performance by Alex Nicholson. There's really just no way to put it. I mean, he got taken down quick. He didn't do anything really to get much off his back, whether offense from striking or submissions. Gave up his back and just got pounded out. I mean, this was just a bad performance by him. I know he got up after the fight, was kind of complaining that it was a quick stoppage, but, I mean, everything in this fight, I feel like he kind of let Jack Hermanson in. He was doing nothing to stop him, and I'm not really sure what he was trying to do in this fight, but I thought this was a very bad performance by Alex Nicholson, young guy, big guy in this class, has some power, I just thought it was a really bad performance. I'm not trying to take anything away from Hermanson, but I thought he pretty much let Hermanson do whatever he wanted in this fight. Hermanson took advantage and got that first round knockout victory. I think it's simple as that. Next matchup of the evening in the welterweight division, Nordin Talin against Oliver Enkamp. Enkamp definitely is a guy that you can tell has a lot of potential. He's a very creative striker. Is a guy that is still very young and trying to put together his mixed martial arts game. But the one thing about this matchup is to throw and he is the future. I think that is an apt nickname for him. But to throw a lot of these strikes, you got to have space. You got to be able to create space and throw these things at range. And Talib is a guy that is very much a classic Muay Thai striker. He's a guy that likes to go forward. He likes to strike in the pocket. And because of that, good footwork as well, he's going to cut down on that range you need to throw a lot of these big kicks and spinning attacks and stuff like that. And when you start moving forward and you get inside the phone booth, those strikes you can't throw. And if you do, you're going to get caught, or they're just going to lose their effectiveness because you're not catching them on the end of the strike. You're catching it kind of in the middle. And Talib, I thought, did very well in this fight to not allow the range there. And as he was kind of chasing him down, there were some takedowns involved there. You could tell the young man, Enkamp, there was starting to wear down a little bit as well. and I think that was a big factor. Talib definitely, I think, a little better condition. Also, I think the bigger guy, too. Enkamp's not a huge welterweight. Talib is a guy who has competed in the middleweight division in his career before. I think that was a big factor as well. And just a learning experience. Again, this was his first fight, fighting in front of his home country there. That always adds a certain level of pressure to fighting, especially in a stage like the UFC on the main card. And you could also factor that in as well. I think this kid has a lot of potential, but that's one thing he's going to have to adjust, is when guys kind of start to track him down, can he still strike when it's in the phone booth, or can he circle out quick enough to throw those big strikes? And that's something he's going to have to adjust if he wants to be successful in the UFC. Otherwise, guys like Talib are going to be able to kind of walk him down, cut that distance down, and are going to be able to make the fight a little uglier, which is something that Enkamp doesn't want to do, at least as of right now in his career. The next fight of the evening in the welterweight division, Omari Akhmedov against Abdul Hassan. I thought this was a very close fight, deserving of a split decision, but one thing that really stood out to me was, despite a very accomplished judo background in Al Hassan, it did not seem like he had any answer for the takedown attempts of the sambo background of Akhmedov. And that was a huge difference of this fight. It just seemed like when Akhmedov needed a takedown, he was able to get it and kind of really sucked the life out of Al Hassan, a guy that really seemed to get better, I think, as this fight went on, especially with his striking. I think in the first round, he was really trying to feel it out. I think so was Akhmedov. Didn't really see a whole lot from either guy in that first round. Did see the takedown there by Akhmedov. Was able to kind of control, not do a whole lot of damage, did outstrike him 17-9. In round two, thought you really saw the takedown, become apparent, and Halzan just not having the answer, getting taken down 3 times out of all 3 attempts there, and he got outstruck 46-21. And I thought round 3, you saw some of those flashes again. Halzan was a guy that came into this fight, all his victories by first-round knockout. I think he was 7-0, all 7 fights, first-round knockouts, and not had a fight go past a minute 30. So when you get into a fight that gets super deep, a fight that goes 15 minutes, as much as he looked well conditioned. I think he was probably the better condition of the two, but I think mentally that does play on you a little bit when you're not getting that finish. As much as they probably say it won't heading into the fight, that has to play with you a little bit as a fight goes on, knowing like, man, how come I didn't scorch this guy in a minute 30? I think that plays with you something. Also added was his UFC debut, and like I said, for a guy that has a judo background, so you would think would be somewhat tough to take down, or at least maybe put up more resistance than getting taken down 6 times out of 9 attempts, but he just didn't have that there. And when the fight did go to the ground, I think Akhmedov didn't do a lot offensively, but he was able to control the fight, and for the most time, Alhassan was not really getting up quickly. You didn't see a lot of bursts. You didn't see any submissions or anything, being thrown up from the bottom as well. And I think for Alhassan, that was the big hole, was he has to work on stopping the takedown and being able to get up quickly. It's got to be one of the two. And for Akhmedov, maybe a little bit work on the conditioning. I mean, he did get hit with some hard shots, but I mean, at the end of the day, he only got hit with 44 shots out of 102 thrown. He did put a lot out there. I mean, 213 strikes is a really solid clip. High point being 89 thrown in round 2. He also got it. He did work a little bit, but this was a fight where he was able to see a hole. He took advantage of it, and even though he had a little trouble, still was able to land kind of a clutch takedowns when he needed to, and got the victory over a guy who I think he has to fix a little bit holes in his game, maybe work on the game plan a little bit. And this guy, I think, with that power to go with the judo background, could be a very scary individual here with the welterweight division. But very nice win for Akhmedov. Peter Sabata against Ben Saunders. I thought this was a very impressive performance by Peter Sabata. Did not let the height and reach and long limbs of Ben Saunders really get to him. Came right after him. And I didn't think Ben Saunders looked particularly good in this fight. He had a couple of nice kicks, but even though he has a lot of reach, didn't really use it. and didn't really cover up a lot of well. I didn't think he was doing a lot of things defensively, was allowing the striking of Sabata to get to him. Really did nothing to adjust in between the first round and second round, where he definitely got tagged. Didn't try for any takedowns, didn't try to really clinch up, to use his Muay Thai striking or even pull guard, where the few instances ones around you could see that mission control that he does, it's so hard to deal with. And I just thought that Ben Saunders was kind of just going out there seeing what was happening, not really trying to implement a game plan. And I think Peter Sabata went out there kind of as a man on the mission, knowing that I'm going to push forward, I'm going to throw solid strikes, and if he's not going to move his head or, try to keep me at distance, I think I can land some bombs. And I thought Sabata went out there more with the plan, and I think it showed. Look at the performance. Sabata was definitely getting the better of the two, and it just didn't seem like Saunders had any answer. And this is a guy who's a solid veteran who's been in many fights against top guys in this division over several years in the UFC and Bellator. And I thought he looked pretty lackadaisical, in my opinion. And Sabata, I feel like he wanted it more. He went out there, the more prepared individual, and it doesn't surprise me that he got a knockout. And I picked Ben Saunders in this fight, too. I thought he was going to be able to use his length more, and if the fight went to the ground, his grappling was going to be better than Sabata's. That didn't really happen. Sabata didn't make the ground two-part of the equation, and because of that, stand-up fight, maybe not quite, a little more 50-50. Sabata just comes throwing hard, gets a knockout. Great performance by him. And, for Ben Saunders, definitely a guy that, they were talking about how, he had a good win over, Court McGee in his last fight. Honestly, I thought he looked kind of bad against Court McGee in a fight where he did win by unanimous decision. I didn't think he looked that great. And then, obviously, the fight before he got knocked out by Patrick Cote, I really think his last several fights he hasn't looked that great. So I don't know if this is a case of just him getting old or not preparing well or what, but I think Ben Saunders has to change some things up if he wants to continue to fight in the UFC, because I really think his last three fights, he has not looked very good. And really the fights this fight was somewhat enjoyable. Sabata obviously did well, but him himself has not looked that enjoyable, if that makes any sense. Let's get to the co-main event of the evening, Volkan Ozdemir against Misha Krunkinov. And boy, this was not only an upset, but how it happened, I think, was maybe more shocking than anything. As this fight only lasted 28 seconds, kind of a quick exchange, and then all of a sudden, as Krunkinov comes in, or Serkinov, I believe it is, came in, you see Ozdemir throw a quick right hook there, landed just behind the ear there of Misha, sent him crashing to the canvas, and that was it. Just a well-timed counter hook by Ozdemir, caught Misha in the right spot, and he went to the canvas, and that was it. I mean, this was very unexpected, despite Ozdemir being higher ranked in the UFC light heavyweight rankings. I think a lot of people thought Misha was the favorite, myself included. I picked Serkinov, and Ozdemir, guy who, he did beat OSP, but let's not go out there and say that he completely dominated OSP or anything like that. It was a close fight. It was somewhat of a sloppy fight, but he did get the job done. But, maybe Volkan's better than I gave him credit for. I mean, that was a superbly placed counter hook, and he got the finish. And this is a guy that, now ranked 5, definitely moves up. And with the light heavyweight division being lacking on contenders and really just overall depth, a guy like Ozdemir with a victory like this could put himself one fight away from a title shot. Realistically, because we'll get to the main event, but obviously I thought the winner of the main event before this fight would get a shot at the heavyweight title, and I think that's probably going to be the case unless something crazy happens where Jones and Cormier don't end up fighting at 214, which is very likely, considering how many times that rematch has been booked and rebooked and scrapped and moved and changed and all that. So that is very likely. But Ozdemir is a guy that puts himself in a very good position. I think Jimmy Manuwa he's scheduled for UFC 214. As of right now, according to Sheerdog, it says unknown fighter. So I don't think he has an opponent booked yet. With Ozdemir winning in 28 seconds, that fight is in 2 months. He could still rest a week or two and still be good to go for 214. I think there's a very likely chance we could see Ozdemir against Jimmy Manuwa at UFC 14, and that possibly sets up another number one contender as well. I also think Shogun's a very likely possibility for Jimmy Manuwa, or possibly Vladimir Ozdemir as well. But I think that with the way, he obviously didn't take any damage, so if I was Ozdemir, I think that maybe I would try to get Jimmy Manuwa at 214, because if you beat Jimmy Manuwa, that's another top 10 guy. That's 3 wins in the top 10 of your first UFC fights. That would be huge, and you can make a very strong case for getting a title shot. He probably would be the underdog once again, probably against Manuwa or Shogun, but this is a guy that he definitely proved me wrong, and definitely a guy I'm not going to take as lightly moving forward in any matchup in the light heavyweight division. Sticking with that light heavyweight division, getting to this main event here, Alexander Gustafsson against Glover Teixeira. Now, this one fight of the night, and here's the thing. This was a good fight by Alexander Gustafsson. It was an exciting fight because Alexander Gustafsson did good. It wasn't a great fight because both Glover Teixeira and Alexander Gustafsson were battling it out. So I want to make that clear. I didn't say I didn't enjoy what happened, but as far as I look at fight night as both guys battling it out, having a chance to win. You don't know who's going to win, and to me, that was Joaquim Silva against Reza Madadi. So to me, I think that was maybe the main event playing into the decision there. However, I think you could contend that it should have won a performance tonight in terms of knockout. I don't think there's any dispute for that in my opinion. I think you could have made it knockout of the night because of just how it happened, the level of the main event in the 5th round. You don't see too many 5th round finishes. But really, this fight was very reminiscent, I think, when Glover fought John Jones. While Glover is a very good striker, he does move forward. He's not a very quick guy. He doesn't have quick feet. He doesn't have quick hands. But he can plod forward. He can take a punch. He throws super hard. And he can do it in volume. He can throw a lot of volume. But when you add in speed and range to the factor, like Gustafsson, he was going to have a hard time landing those power strikes, and he was going to have a hard time, getting out of the way or getting into range when Gustafsson did decide to strike. And I know there was an eye poke incident there. I think it was towards the end of the first or beginning of the second. Did that affect Teixeira? Yeah, it probably did. Do I think it made a difference in this fight? Do I think the outcome changed because of it? No, I still think the same things were going to happen. You were going to see Gustafsson be able to strike well at range, reset when Glover chased, and that's pretty much how I thought this fight was going to go. And if Glover did decide to go to the ground, Gustafsson has great takedown defense, and as you saw, Glover was not very successful because, again, to get a takedown, you got to be able to get in range. And so being able to strike at range helps with takedown defenses. Glover was only successful on 1 of 5 of his takedowns, and then because of that range, only threw 155 strikes, only landed 62, got outstruck in every single round. The only round that was semi-close, not counting the 5th because he got that knockout quick, but the other 4 rounds was 19-17, which was slightly in favor there of Glover, and that was, I think, where Glover was doing. That's because Gustafsson, I think defensively, one thing, even though he had better range, when he was kind of resetting and circling around in those striking exchanges, he was definitely keeping his head open and his hands down. And I think a couple of times Glover caught him. I think that was the only really big hole I saw for Gustafsson in that fight. But because of his reach and speed, he was able to get out of those moments unscathed. Luckily, here against Teixeira, against a guy like John Jones, that is something he's going to have to correct because Jones is going to be able to have the speed and reach to counter on those exchanges. And also, I saw a lot more movement in this fight than we saw in his title loss to Daniel Cormier, a guy shorter, obviously in stature, not quite the striker of Glover Teixeira, but in terms of being shorter, a guy that maybe plots forward more. In that respect, that's the type of game plan we needed to see against Cormier. We saw here against Glover, and if he can do that, against Cormier, he can get the victory. That's one thing that kind of lacked. He let Cormier get inside, fight him in a phone booth, a much, much shorter dude than even Glover. One of the reasons why he ended up losing that fight. And as far as Jones go, when he does exit those exchanges on a longer guy, obviously wasn't the case this fight, he's going to have to put some hands up or tried to circle the head away more because that was a little bit of a hole. But other than that, flawless striking performance, was able to get in and out, not get hit, and then that ending combination, the 3 straight uppercuts followed by the straight right, absolutely fantastic. Definitely put an exclamation point on that victory, and I think it would have been nice, if he would have rode out, winning all 5 rounds, I think, but to go in there in his hometown to get the finish, to probably get another shot in the title and knock out Glover Teixeira with a combination like that, I think puts a message there to Cormier and Jones, the guys he's going to be facing next, I believe. And I know Jimmy Manuwa's out there, but I'm going to be honest, I don't think Jimmy Manuwa stands a chance against either Cormier or John Jones. Alexander Gustafsson, despite losing already to both those gentlemen, was very close to beating both those gentlemen, and I think is the right choice for later this year against either Cormier or Jones, whoever comes out of it. Especially if it's John Jones, because that's a rematch that's been built up for years for how close that first fight was between those two individuals. I think if Jones wins, that has to be the fight. If Cormier wins, if you want it, again, Jimmy Manuwa's supposed to fight at UFC 214. So there is a case where maybe you could see Jimmy Manuwa jump Gustafsson in that standpoint. Maybe. But I still think it's going to be Gustafsson gets the win. I think that puts the stamp on it, and really looking forward to it. And for Glover, that was his last shot. If he would have beat Gustafsson there, he probably would have got another title shot. Now, he already lost to John Jones. He just now lost to Alexander Gustafsson. I don't know. Maybe he could beat Cormier. Maybe. I don't know. But it's kind of about getting back up there. Now, the one good thing for Glover Teixeira is the fact that this is not a super deep division. If he goes back out there and beats a Misha Serkinov, beats a Vladimir Ozdemir, beats a Jimmy Manuwa, he can be right back in the thick of things. Because as of right now, we don't have too many young contenders coming up here in this division for the light heavyweights in the UFC. So for Glover, while in most cases, he's kind of pretty much done, actually may find himself not that far from the top, considering that this is just right now a solid division. So if he sticks around, maybe he ends up getting a title shot. I don't know, but I just don't see him beating the top guys right now. He's just a little older, a little slower, and while still extremely talented and is going to be a tough out for anybody, I just don't see that anymore from him, being at that championship level. Once again, my name is Jim Graham. Thank you to everybody watching here on MMA Warriors Facebook page. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. You can also like Beyond the Cage on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. Follow me on Instagram at the Jim Graham, and also check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. More interviews, fighter interviews are up on the page, and I have more coming today. Drew Dober, Jared Brooks, who will be both competing at UFC 204, or 214 rather. I'm also going to have Marlon Moraes. That interview is going to be on there as well. Marlon Moraes fighting this weekend at UFC 212, making his UFC debut, the former World Series of Fighting bantamweight champion. And also joining me later this afternoon is going to be kickboxing star Raymond Daniels, who's now kickboxing for Bellator. Very interested to talk to him, not only the future about Bellator kickboxing, of course, with another guy that used to fight in Glory like himself, Gohan Saki, signing with the UFC. I really want to see what Raymond thinks Saki will do in the UFC's light heavyweight division, being one of the former kickboxing greats in Glory. So stay tuned for that on youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, or of course the audio version of this show available on iTunes and Google Play by searching Beyond the Cage podcast. So for MMA Warriors, thank you for hosting Beyond the Cage. I am Jim Graham. Until next time, thank you for watching.